Well, hello. Thinking about coming to the Philippines? One thing you may want to do before you come is put together your bucket list. And come along with me, I'll explain why. Let's get started. "25 years ago, my mother was dying with cancer. She was in bed with a stroke and had terminal breast cancer. The last thing she said to me was, if there's ever anything that you want to do it. Don't wait until you're here and wishing you would have." That ate into my mind for a long time. And having kids, I had to wait for them to grow up before I could work on my bucket list, which was really to travel to around the world, but particularly Southeast Asia and the Philippines. But eventually, my kids grew up, I sold my business, and then I worked on my bucket list. And this is a synopsis of the first part before I left. Today I wanted to address some questions that a lot of foreigners ask me when I'm traveling the world. Why would you leave the United States? Well, a lot of reasons, but mainly I decided before I leave that I'd work on my bucket list and take care of some things in the U.S. before I left. One of them was to travel 2,000 miles to see some relatives, both dead and alive. So I threw things in my truck and headed on the road. I drove 2,000 miles from Texas up to upstate New York and Vermont and decided I wanted to go camp in the mountains for a couple of months by myself. So I picked out a spot on Google Maps and drove about 20 miles in away from civilization. I drove right to the spot that I had picked out on Google Maps and decided to camp there for a few months. I really wanted to see if I could. I told my kids I wanted to try to find a moose, which they thought was quite hilarious and thought I was a little bit crazy for picking a place way far away that I'd never been to and stuck way up in the middle of the mountains. But that's what I did. And so I sold the business, packed it up, and headed out. Fortunately, I got up into the mountains. I found it very nice. There was no one around. I bumped into a few cabins scattered here and there as I was traveling up through the logging roads. And very nice time of the mid to late summer. And the funny thing about it, when I was driving there, I actually had gotten to the exact spot that I had picked out on Google Maps, which surprised me. And stepped out of when I got there, I stepped out of the truck. And as soon as I stepped down, I looked down at my feet, and lo and behold, there was a moose track right there. So I decided to take the rest of the afternoon, climb up the mountain, see if I could track it down. I spent about a half a day tracking it, decided to sit down and take a break. While I was taking a break, I heard a little noise behind me, a twig snap. I turned around, and lo and behold, there's a moose. Female moose standing right there looking at me. We looked at each other for a little bit, and I tried to turn around so I could get my camera, and then she started to walk towards me. Once she started to walk towards me, I got a little bit nervous because obviously in that time of the year they could have babies and they will get a little bit hostile. And I'm guessing she's probably never seen anyone up in the forest like that because I was so deep in. But after that experience, I decided to get back down, get a cold shower out of the stream, and then go cook some food in my truck. And fortunately, I did bring enough food and a gas stove to take care of that, and I enjoyed my meals immensely in the mountains. Did not go without, used the stream as a refrigerator because the water there is very cold, and enjoyed that. After a period, I decided it was time to kind of head out again and get on with my bucket list, which is to go see the graveyard where many of my ancestors are buried, and also family, close family, and some of my living members of my father's family. However, I was a little bit rough looking still from being in the mountains. I needed a haircut, so I decided to go ahead and get cleaned up and then get back on the road to about a 5-hour drive along the Canadian border in upstate New York to get to the point where my relatives and ancestors are. So I did that. I left Burlington here, that's the Burlington Mountain, after having a good lunch. And actually, one thing that kind of scared me is I bumped into this sign and thought, Now this is probably the state I'm not real comfortable in. So I got on the road and headed across New York State along the Canadian border. I did got into town and wanted to first, I guess, really stop and see my relatives. This is St. Patrick's Cemetery. I have ancestors here for the last 150 years. When I go in there, it's funny, I can go in and see a lot of gravestones with my exact name, which is a little bit weird. But I did I actually carried my grandmother to her grave here. And this is my niece and nephew both died at a young age. This is my mother's sister who I went to see. She's 92 years old, and her husband Jack, 92 as well. The man on the right is my dad. The man on the left is my Uncle Jim. And he's the last remaining one of everyone. He's 94. I went to his farmhouse to see him, and that would be Jim walking out now. He was very tickled. He wore a Texas cap that I had given to him. A guy's got a great sense of humor, likes to drink a beer or two every day, 94 years old, living on the same farm he's lived all of his life. And so I was very blessed to spend a few days with him and get caught up, share some old photographs, which I was able to obtain for the family. And then, as I said, it was just a real joy. He's my dad's brother, and they always were very close, and I did want to make sure I touched base with them. Unfortunately, a few months after I left him, he did pass away. But he was happy to go. His wife had already passed away, and they were side by side resting in the cemetery. I came across this sign. I know it'd be politically not correct today, but it wasn't had to do with the black and white. It had to do with white and Indians, because it's Indian country. This is where I spent my childhood. Every summer we would go to this St. Regis River, this beautiful lake. That was my playground. And this was my playground where I would spend all summer swimming and fishing. And just in back of this bridge is a farm. That's the farm where I would work. I would go baling hay, feeding cows, slopping hogs, catching chickens and things like that. But that was my playground and what I did every summer as a child. And this is a very remote area, so it was real nice. Unfortunately, up the river a little bit, this spot here is where my mother and father actually used to play as children. So I was born in this area. My parents were born, my grandparents, my great-parents, my great-great-grandparents, all from this area, dating back 150 years. So it has some real history for me, and is an area that I wanted to touch base with on my bucket list before I left the country, because I don't think I'll ever see it again. But all of a sudden we got a blast of cold weather, and it was starting to get cold up there, and we got some snow. So I figured it was due time for me to point the truck back south and get my tail back to Texas. Is exactly what I did. Bucket list achieved. Saw relatives, dead and alive. Saw my old locations where I wanted to, and I was on the road again. But not soon enough. Lo and behold, Mr. Winter decided to blow in and give me one last snowstorm before I got out of there, and which was okay. I love a good snowstorm. I love it. I love it when it's snowing outside and I'm indoors and nice and warm. But this really didn't. This one caught me off guard, and driving in the forest was not too bad. But once I got out of the forest, the wind picked up and got to be pretty bad, actually. I guess they called it a nor'easter. And like I said, I kind of liked it. I did want to get on the road, but I was inside and warm. It's very blustery outside, really picturesque to me. But it was probably the last snowstorm of my life, I'm guessing. So it was another thing on my bucket list that was unintended, but a nice surprise. I didn't mind it at all. Sat inside, nice and warm, drinking some coffee, and then later some hot cocoa. Just like I did when I was a kid, to be honest. So enjoyed that part of it. Almost to the end of the bucket list with this series here in the United States, but there are a couple more things I wanted to do. And of course, getting down back to Texas and seeing my family was a big one. But like I said, it got pretty blustery out there, so I really wasn't going anywhere. I haven't driven in the snow in several decades, more than several decades. So I wasn't about to take the chance and get caught in a blizzard and get crash my vehicle up there. So I just hunkered down. Next day, sun came up. Still a lot of snow on the ground, but drivable for sure. So I decided to get out and start navigating slowly my way down south. Snowplows really hadn't gotten out yet, but I have good tires, so I figured I'd go ahead and get out of there when I could before the next one blew in. And finally, after about 12 hours driving, I was down in Tennessee. And of course, it's always beautiful down there. I love driving through this great state of Tennessee, beautiful hills, mountains. And then finally made it back to Texas. Coming through Austin, I'm always happy when I come across that Texarkana state line. I see the sign out there that says, "Welcome to Texas." And of course, rolled into Houston at night, grabbed a hotel room just to rest before I got to see the family. And, back into the traffic, as you can see. That's just kind of the way it goes in Houston. But I did have one other thing that I wanted to do before I left for the Philippines. I did have to go out and get me a good Texas barbecue brisket. And I've been going to the same place for many years, and I love it. That is about the best brisket you can get right there. And with that, mission is totally complete. Now it's just a matter of spending a little bit of time with family, and I'm off on the plane to head over to Southeast Asia and wait for the medical restrictions to lift in the Philippines. I did want to pay tribute to some of the folks up there, that my ancestors. I had told you in the beginning of the video that I wanted to visit living and dead. Some of these people, like my dad right here, he was a Korean War vet. Lost his leg in his eye in Korea and was awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. The Bronze Star for heroism for saving a couple of his fellow soldiers while under fire. He had lost his leg and his eye, but he was still able to save two other gentlemen and drag them into a safe area so they could be rescued. And as you can see, I have a big family of military veterans. These are my father and his two brothers, but I also have on my mother's side two other uncles that were in the military. Both my grandfathers were in World War II. So, I mean, the military history just goes all throughout my family, always has. Unfortunately, well, not really unfortunately, fortunately for me and my children, we opted not to go to war. We're kind of against war. But here's my mom and dad, and as you can see, he's got crutches there. He married after he came back from the war, but at that point, he hadn't gotten his wooden leg yet, so he was still using his crutches. And the gentleman in this picture here is my Uncle Jim, the one that was in the video earlier when I was visiting his farm to see him. He has now since passed away. He was a strapping young man, really ladies' man in his day, I think. And here's my grandfather, my grandmother on my dad's side, and my Uncle Jim again, when they were alive. And they were, again, all farmers up in the extreme northern New York State. And this is actually Jeremiah. He is my great-grandfather. He's actually the one that came from Ireland. And I see one of my grandfathers standing behind him, center of the picture. And I guess that's his wife, the big lady sitting down there. I guess he liked big women. Jeremiah wasn't a very big guy, but he got a big wife. And this is my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather. She was a midwife. She's got quite an amazing history of traveling throughout the North Country, delivering babies in blizzards and having to stay for days with them until they delivered. Real long history. And this is my grandmother. She died when my mom was just like 6, 7 years old. She went into the hospital for a procedure, and I guess they nicked something inside her, and she bled to death, never came out. Sad story. And this is her husband, who ended up, raising 8 kids on his own. But he was a good fisherman, and he got one. That's a muskie. He got one bigger than that. It was as big as his body, pretty much. I had gone to Vermont because that's where he was originally from. I wanted to visit his hometown. But after World War II, he left. I guess he met my grandmother, and he moved over to where she was from in upstate New York. Well, I did want to cover some, I promised you at the beginning of the video that I would explain to you. Well, these are some pictures of me, by the way, some old pictures of me. I just figured I'd throw them in there for buy some time, but that is if you're still with me. But listen, a couple things. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video about my mom who was dying and said, she was on her deathbed, literally, and said, if if there's things in life that you want to do them. Don't wait until you're laying on your deathbed and wish the heck you'd have done them, because there's no turning around at that point. So when I mentioned at the beginning of the video, to have your bucket list, make a bucket list. We all have things that we wish we would have done or could have done, and for whatever reason we didn't do them. Maybe we had kids, or maybe we had career, or whatever it was. But if there was things in the back of your mind that are itching at you to do them, make a list, do them. Mine were just simple. I wanted to travel. I wanted to go to Southeast Asia, South America, Central America, all that stuff. And but because I had kids, I wasn't going to leave them until they were grown and out and on their own. And all that occurred, everything fell into place. And even though I have, an illness that I battle, I'm still out there doing it. So make your bucket list. Don't be afraid to knock it out. Get her done, and you'll be glad you did. Don't wait and have regrets in life. In the meantime, safe travels, and remember, a rolling stone gathers no moss.